Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. When you pull the curtain back on the mind behind one of the most popular forensic figures in the past 30 years, Jeffery Deaver, inventor of the global phenomena that became the Lincoln Rhyme book series, and blockbuster Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie film adaptation and TV series, is among the true masters of crime fiction working in the genre today. Incredibly influential over generations of thriller, mystery, and police forensic series authors, Deaver's rhyme role was first born with the now legendary Bone Collector, quickly rocketing to the top of the New York Times bestseller list 25 years ago and staying there ever since with The Coffin Dancer, The Empty Chair, The Stone Monkey, The Vanished Man, The 12th Card, The Cold Moon, The Broken Window, The Burning Wire, The Kill Room, The Skin Collector, The Steel Kiss, The Burial Hour, The Cutting Edge, and The Midnight Lock. The New York Times has celebrated Jeffery Deaver's forte as the diabolical puzzle mystery. The master manipulator that he is, Deaver shows us exactly how it's done and makes us admire his own literary artistry. His prolific catalog includes standalone bestsellers like Mistress of Justice, Praying for Sleep, A Maiden's Grave, Speaking in Tongues, The Blue Nowhere, Garden of Beasts, The Chopin Manuscript, The Bodies Left Behind, Edge and the Octoberless, alongside other successful series like those starring Katherine Dance and Coulter Shaw. His Rune trilogy, and the John Pelham Location Scout series, along with being tapped in 2011 to write a new James Bond novel, Carte Blanche, where critics were bowled over, with the Sunday Express UK predicting that Bond fans will enjoy Deaver's slightly mischievous take on Ian Fleming. Deaver fans will enjoy the taut plotting and action scenes. While the Independent UK raved that the novel proves itself worthy of the 007 logo on its spine by presenting us with one of the most bone-chillingly creepy bad guys in Bond history. Winner of the CWA Ian Fleming Steel Dagger Award, the Best Thriller of the Year Award from the International Thriller Writers Association, and the Nero Award, Deaver was most recently honored with the Edgar Grand Master Award in 2021. Mr. Deaver, we cannot fully tell you how thrilled we are to have you here today. We're very excited. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Hi, Jake. Call me Jeff, please.
Now, before we get started with anything else, you have a fascinating way of writing we'd love to reveal for viewers if you'd be willing to share.
I can touch type. Yeah, I did. I've been touch typing now. I didn't learn touch typing in journalism school. Why? Because we had old Underwoods and you had to get a running start to hit the keys. I don't know if your viewers have seen it, but it's all big black box and you go like this, ring, and then you'd start over again. But when I got out, when I was a journalist, I had IBM Selectrics and I learned to touch type on those. And for your viewers out there, potential readers, it's not hard to learn. I would absolutely do it. And so I close my eyes. I do long outlines. I look at the outline section I have to write. I say, okay, section 42, Lincoln Rhyme's got to find a clue. Okay, close my eyes and just then out it comes. And you have to look up occasionally. You know, they have those little buttons on the F and the J keys. You have to make sure your hands are centered. I don't always do so well with the numbers and the punctuation, but you know, it's I bang out my first drafts. Lee Child said something great about writing. He said, "Don't get it right, get it written," and that's so true. I just bang out the first draft, close my eyes, bang out the first draft, then go back and rewrite.
I understand that Ian Fleming, and specifically from Russia with Love, first planted the idea of becoming a writer when you grew up. Who or any other authors before then that first drew you into a love of reading?
I was a nerd when I was growing up. Literally, I had no talent for sports whatsoever. The girls, the cheerleaders and pom-pom girls ignored me uniformly. I'd stand out in the sports field where I'd been stuck in right field where you can do the least damage because the team captains would vie to make sure I was on the other team. But, none of that really mattered because I had books. I spent most afternoons and many weekends in the Glen Ellen, Illinois Public Library. And I just fell in love with books then. Now, I didn't start writing until I was about 11 or 12. It was all incipient work. It wasn't really that obviously it wasn't that talented. There are no prodigy writers. Jackson Pollock was spattering paint when he was a kid. And Mozart was composing, but writers need to live a little while. So that stuff I wrote back then was, very bad. And thank goodness it's disappeared. I certainly hope so. But I knew books were important. I liked books. Books brought you together. Books could take you away from your daily woes. And my parents were avid readers. They had, the house was filled with books. And growing up in the 1950s, I had a rather curious rule imposed by my parents. I could read any book I could get my hands on in the house or elsewhere, but I could not see certain movies, which was quite ironic because in the 1950s, movies were all like PG rated. I mean, there was no sex. The violence was all off camera. They were, rather inappropriate because John Wayne was gunning down Native Americans simply because that was his mission, with no forethought into the morality of it. But a kid doesn't care about that, of course. And so, but if I got my hands on a Nazanin, on Henry Miller, I would have been bored, but I could have read it, of course. And the people I got into at that age, and I'm talking 8 or 9, Ian Fleming, John D. MacDonald, Raymond Chandler, whoever, some of the big epics of the time. And I think of The Shoes of the Fisherman, and the author just escaped me, but these large, moving stories that would occupy, I don't know, 1,000, 800, 1,000 pages. And so I liked any book that told a story. And if I had gone back, let's play the time machine thing here, and been given Ulysses by James Joyce, or Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, that would not have been for me. I respect the genius of those two and the many others who are more stream of conscious, more surreal. But I want a story, and a story is a middle, beginning, and end. Characters we believe in, good characters and bad characters, running into increasing levels of conflict, which conflict is ultimately resolved to the reader's satisfaction. That's my definition of story. That's what I try to bring to all of mine. So that's what I looked for when I was that nerdy kid standing out in the right field, daydreaming about poems I would write as the ball sailed over my head. Miss McConnell was my journalism teacher. I went to Glenbard West, a very enlightened school. I mean, it was high school, but there were college level courses that one could take if one had the aptitude for it, of course. And Miss McConnell was my journalism teacher. I ultimately went to the University of Missouri Journalism School because I knew I wanted to write, but I also knew I wanted to buy food and water and have a place to live. So I wanted to be practical about it. So she was someone who, in her traditional role as a writer, a teacher of professional writers, she taught me proper grammar, Strunk and White, the elements of style. I was in high school learning that, which students I'm sure do now, but at the time it seemed it was a little revolutionary, and taught me the structure, and then allowed me to write an op-ed column for the newspaper. It was a humorous Dave Barry kind of column. So that was the one side. At the same time, Miss Virginia Gannon was my creative writing teacher, and as you say, she encouraged me to no end, and encouraged me to become editor of the literary magazine, The Bard, appropriately named Glenbard West, named The Bard. And I did that. At the time, now this is high school, I had given up writing my juvenile adventure stories that I wrote at 11 and 12. James Bond pastiches, Len Dighton pastiches, that sort of thing. John le Carré came a little bit later. I was in my teens when he started writing. I think Call for the Dead was his first, I think in 63, maybe 62 or 63. But I was then writing poetry, and I love poetry and still do love poetry. And I don't know if I love telling my stories, but I certainly wouldn't mind publishing poetry now. I find it quite difficult to write. I should say challenging to write, because I'm a bit of a formalist. It's not sing song, da 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 da. It's not that, but it's kind of like Wallace Stevens, who would play with rhythm and rhyme internally, and write. I tended to write poems about the human condition, some political poems, some romantic poems. Love doing that. So until I went off to journalism school at around 17 or 18, I focused on poetry. Always had in the back of my head that someday I was going to write commercial fiction. But again, you need to input that. You need to live life a little while. And I thought as a journalist, that would be a handy thing to, kind of fill me full of the details of life, the nitty gritty aspects, the good guys and the bad guys. And that would provide material for me later when I made the leap to writing fiction. And I wanted to write full time. I have never, and we can talk about this later, but I've had no problem sitting in a room like this. This is actually well lit for me now. Usually I sit in the dark room for 12 hours a day and write. Never happier than when I'm doing that.
You worked for an actual newspaper while you were still in college. How did this upper echelon level of writing help evolve your overall craft?
At the University of Missouri, we didn't work on the school paper. We worked on the daily paper. I mean, the Missourian, and it was the town of, at the time, probably 35,000 people. It was a small town in central Missouri, Columbia, Missouri. And so we were actually given assignments, and there was a radio station. So if you were on the broadcast track, you would go there and go to the radio station, and you may have written the story. You might have actually been on air if you had a good voice and the ability to pronounce, foreign names quickly. But I had no interest in hard news. I had an interest in magazine work, and actually you could take a magazine track. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Journalism degree with a magazine major because I wanted to take my time. And whereas the hard news reporters would go cover city council, which I had no interest in that, and that would have been very difficult for me. But I could spend 2 weeks or so interviewing people. Of course, you have to do that, but doing other research, pre-internet, of course, long before the internet. But go to the library, go to the public records, and cover a topic, and then put together. How long were they? I don't know. Probably, 1,000. 2,000 words short, but of course, space, they were printed in the paper. And I have to say, I also studied typography and design. And I designed my articles and tried to make things a little strange, a little bit different. We didn't have an art department as such. For the magazines, you could, if I remember correctly, you would hand in your story, and then they would do your basic, Times Roman headline, or an Optima headline, or Helvetica headline, sans serif, and then out would come the story. You had to arrange for your own artwork too. And I love doing that. But I like the in-depth work. I like the slower depth, and I preferred the writing, frankly, to sitting down with somebody and pinning them down and putting them on the spot. It was the absolutely vital aspect of writing that it is about clear communication. End of story. Just to not to be too esoteric about this, but I tend, because I think a comma is a hiccup and it slows the reading down. And that's the last thing I want in my books. So take an adverbial clause. When I walked into the room, comma, I saw the gun on the floor. Well, according to the Chicago Style Manual, that comma is required. It's an adverbial clause at the beginning of a sentence. Well, is there any confusion when that comes out? No, there isn't. So I would tend to take that out. But I learned that I didn't need to be afraid to break some of those rules as long as my thought went immediately into the mind of the reader. Nathaniel Hawthorne said, and I just copped he said it more articulately than I, but I just stole that his idea a moment ago. He said, a writer's words should dissolve into pure thought, meaning, of course, we shouldn't read a paragraph, and I'm not going to name any authors now, but some are breathtaking stylists. How they put those words together, I could never do in a million years. But then when you come to the end of that paragraph, you think, I better go back and reread that because I don't know what the hell it means. It's just you're so focused on this style, and that's the world is kind of divided into stylistic writers who maybe don't have a lot to say. Now there are some that do. John le Carré, for instance. Thomas Harris in the popular genre, absolutely brilliant stylists, and their stories are very compelling too. But what I'm not. I can't do that. I don't have that facility. But what I learned from journalism was that it didn't really matter because it's all about communicating as clearly and concisely as you can.
Some of the very first characters to originate out of your colorful imagination came with the Rune trilogy. Starring an aspiring filmmaker in his young 20s, first in Manhattan Is My Beat, then Death of a Blue movie star in Hard News, and next in the John Pelham series starring the lead protagonist of the same name, a movie scout whose adventures take readers through Shallow Graves, Bloody River Blues, and some years later, Hell's Kitchen. How early on in your career did you first begin working on these two series? Was it while you were still working for the paper?
I wrote 2 novels before the Rune books. One was called Voodoo, an occult, Stephen King kind of occult book, and one was called Always a Thief, about an art thief in Manhattan. And that was written during the time of the, when Soho, it is pre-Tribeca. This is when Soho was transitioning from an industrial area, largely abandoned, former industrial area, to the hot artistic world in New York City. And they were done by an original paperback company, long gone now. They didn't do very well, but I will say they were on the shelves at Barnes and Noble and Borders. I'm sure Borders. Yeah, Borders was in existence then. I mean, it was pre-Borders. In fact, Barnes and Noble, I think, was still primarily the academic publisher down on Lower Fifth Avenue. But it was in certainly in B. Dalton and Walden books, and just to see that slim volume there, that was so exciting. I still get that thrill, by the way. Now I haven't been in a bookstore for a year, of course, but when I see it online, I still get excited. And but I kind of blundered into it. And we can talk about methodology later, but at the time, in college, I was writing mostly poetry to the extent I was writing. Well, I shouldn't say that. Yes, I was writing songs. I was a musician. I was not a good musician, but I was a pretty good songwriter. And in fact, a few years ago, I wrote an album of country western songs that accompanied one of my books. And we can talk about that later if you like. But so I've always had a facility with words, and songs are poetry, end of story. I mean, and look at Paul Simon, who does some very, very clever, non-structured free-form songs. Always comes back to the rhyme, comes back to the rhythm at some point, the meter. But he's probably he and Bob Dylan are probably my idols in the songwriting world. So that's what I was writing in college. And after college, I tried to be a professional musician, but the job title is singer-songwriter, and I could write. That was never the issue. But singing, no, I didn't have any. I don't have a good voice. I can't hit the melody. You see people like what's an example? Paganini, the violinist, and he notoriously talented. He could just play anything. So his buddies got together and wrote a piece that was impossible to play. Simply the fingering could not work. Well, they were going to play a little joke on him. Apparently, this may be apocryphal, but I do remember the story and I love it. And they left the thing on the music stand in a parlor somewhere, and he walked in and glanced at it and said, "Oh, who wrote this?" He said, "The fellow said, I think a couple of us kind of put it together." He said, "Oh, it looks interesting." He took out his violin and played it from memory and played it perfectly. Now, that's the kind of musician I would aspire to be, but that was never going to happen. So it took me like eight months when I realized I better be realistic. We all have dreams that sometimes we pursue too long. I probably should have jumped off that bandwagon, although I still, play for the grandkids and the nieces. I still enjoy that, and I did write that album that did fairly well. I mean, relatively well. And so then I said, well, it's about time. In my early 30s, I was working, I should back up a little bit more, working as a journalist. Then I went to law school. I never really intended to be an attorney. I wanted to get a job with the New York Times covering, or the Wall Street Journal covering the court beat, Supreme Court ideally, or the appellate courts, or just law in general. And I surprised myself. I was not a distinguished academic student at Missouri. I mean, I was like, I graduated well, but it was not a stellar performance. But in law school, I found it so interesting. I did very well. I was on law review. I was third or fourth in my graduating class. And the law firms in New York City, which is where I went to school, noticed that. And a big firm on Wall Street offered me a job and basically doubled or tripled, I should say, my salary as a journalist. So I jumped at it, practiced law for a little while. But by then, I really had the bug to write. And I kind of backed out of the law firm, went to work in-house to get more hours to write. And then I went to work for a publisher. By that time, I was publishing novels. Three of them were the Rune books. And I published, a couple others in the John Pelham series, this location scout who traveled around the country and got involved in crime, sort of an amateur sleuth. And I was finally making enough money. I was single, living in a small place in New York City. I said, I'm just going to leave professions and write. Will I be able to do it? Will I be able to stand not having the water cooler to go to, buddies to go to at lunch? And I woke up the first day after I'd left my job and said, no, this is it. This is heaven. And I never looked back. That was 40 years ago. The Rune books, I think the first one, Manhattan is My Beat, was Edgar nominee. Didn't win, but an Edgar nominee. And suddenly I realized, well, maybe there's something to this. And they did pretty well for paperback originals. And then I wrote the Pelham series. And then I said, I really better get smart about this, because I was looking at people like John Grisham and who were some of the other, there was something called a book called The Fifth Horseman. And I could look it up now, but that's rude to jump away from an interview, but a great thriller. I think this is, some of Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, I'm sorry. And then Black Sunday and Le Carré's books. Le Carré is just amazing. And I said, you know what, these are bigger books. I need to look bigger, because Rune and the Pelham series were traditional murder mysteries. A crime occurs, and Rune, this young waif living in New York City, downtown kind of girl, gets involved in a murder of a man who she worked in a video store. Remember video stores? And she, her customer kept renting the same movie, a film noir called Manhattan is My Beat, over and over again. And those were the days before you could, cheat and you could record a video. That didn't happen on the machine V at the time. And then he's murdered, and she thinks he's murdered because of something about the crime that occurred in this noir, which I made up. And she thinks, it's about a robbery. You know what? I'll bet a big bank robbery back in the 1930s. And I'll bet that he's on a quest to find the hidden treasure from this robbery, because the money was never found. And she gets involved in that. And of course, my writing is always unexpected. Twists are the most important thing in my book. So I learned, even with the Rune books, although I did not construct them in a way I would ultimately settle on, they still had the big surprises and twists and turns in them. And that's really my hallmark. And I think, that kind of carved out a slot for me, which I have to this day.
I think your 50 million fans around the world would agree. Taking early standalone bestsellers like Mistress of Justice, where readers met real works of character art like paralegal jazz pianist Taylor Lockwood, or Sarah Cord, a learning-impaired wild child in love with a serial killer named the Sunshine Man and the Lessons of Her Death, or imperiled teacher Miss Atchison in Praying for Sleep, or a great standoff between escaped convict Lou Handy and hostage negotiator Arthur Potter in A Maiden's Grave, and again between Tate Collier and Aaron Matthews in Speaking in Tongues, hacker Wyatt Gillette in The Blue Nowhere. First, what is your approach to conjuring up the always memorable names that you do book in and out?
Well, with names, I'm, and as we'll talk later, I'm extremely practical about this whole business. I mean, I look at it as a manufacturing process. I'm no different from Procter and Gamble or Boeing or Ford or GM. I construct a creative product, but I approach it the same way. Clear thought, clear communication. I make sure my names are easy to pronounce in the reader's head. I would not have an Arthur and an Andrew in the same book, because the readers are going to get confused by that. I will, so there's no jumping off point from the actual name of the character. I look for something that's practical. Lately, I have been, lately, I mean, for the last 15 years or so, I see no reason why a woman should be addressed by her first name in the narrative. Not dialogue is different, but I, referring to someone as a character, would use her first name, while a man would be referred to by his last name. I mean, it actually smacks of sexism to some extent, I believe. So I've tried to change that, but what I do is I make a non-jarring last name. For instance, I have a character in a short story. I write original short stories for Amazon Original Stories. And I had a character, and her last name was Rose. Well, that's a common last name. Well, so I can legitimately call her Rose by her last name. And so nonetheless, I'm treating her on an equal par with the male characters. Anybody basically under 18 gets first name basis, boys or girls, young men or young women. So names are all part of the, I call them the arrows in our quiver of crafting a book. Although that's a mixed metaphor, I should say arrows in the quiver of fighting a war. Let's say tools in the toolbox of crafting a book. Lest some of your viewers will say, we need to get those figures of speech in line. 95% of my own titles, some I'm stymied on. I can't get it to work, so I rely on my editor, one of my editors, to come up with it. I think The Blue Nowhere, which was an early book about hacking, where a hacker, brilliant genius hacker, would hack through dial-up, believe it or not, with that crispy modem sound. And The Blue Nowhere was a term I coined referring to the internet. And these were the early days of the internet. This is like 97, I think I wrote it. Speaking in Tongues, I loved. It was about a fellow who he was an attorney, a Commonwealth's attorney in Virginia, who was such a good, now he's a Commonwealth's attorney. No, I'm sorry. He had such the gift of gab in speaking to the jury that they convicted somebody wrongly, and that was a scar on his life. And so, those titles just came like that. Some were just, which wrist should I open up? I just can't figure out how to get that title. But I also have to say I would rather have a title that's unique and perhaps, frankly, I hope my publisher's not listening to this, but is unique and would sell fewer books than is generic. I thought, like, Absolute Justice. If there's an author out there who wrote a book called Absolute Justice, God bless you. It's absolutely wonderful. But I thought about justice, so I thought Mistress of Justice. I like that. It's just something different. And what was the other one you mentioned? Oh, well, one I just loved was The Devil's Teardrop. And that was originally going to be called The Last Night of the Year, because a big crime is going to occur in 1999, December 31st, 1999. And it, that said, there was a night to remember the Titanic. This is pre James Cameron's Titanic, but nonetheless, I thought, it's just too generic. And then I thought The Devil's Teardrop came to me. And so I rewrote a good portion of the book and made The Devil's Teardrop a unique dot above a J and an I. That was a clue leading to this forger. And that's one. And there was another one, The 12th Card. That was originally called something else. And I rewrote that book when my editor said, I don't think my original title was going to work. I rewrote that book. When I say rewrite, I spent like 3 days adding sections to it, in which the killer is obsessed with Tarot. And so I just threw that in. And that's, that was kind of handy. So there's a tie in there.
Please pull the curtain back a little farther, if you would, for viewers and your fans on your character development process, using the Garden of Beasts as an example. One of our all-time favorites, where readers are teleported back to 1936 and introduced to German-American mob hitman Paul Schumann, who was actually ordered by the U.S. to murder one of Hitler's key arms figures, Reinhard Ernst.
My only historical thriller, I've written historical short stories, but my only historical novel set in Berlin in 1936. And at that time, and this is true, the Department of Naval Intelligence, which was the early version of the CIA, our international intelligence organization, knew that Hitler was rearming, and that they didn't know at that point about death camps. They knew who he was, and they knew that he was a very brutal leader, and that he surrounded himself with equally brutal men and some women, and that he had to be stopped because he had eyes on the Sudetenland, on the Czech Republic, on France, and they didn't know about Russia at that point, but they probably wouldn't have been that concerned, frankly, because even then there was the East and West dispute. But anyway, they arrested Paul Schumann, who was a mob hitman. They called it a button man, and he was a killer. He only killed bad guys, but he was a murderer. There's no question about that. And they caught him and said, well, Paul, we've got a decision you have to make. One is you go to Sing Sing and get the chair, the prison in New York, or you go to Germany under the guise of a journalist for the 1936 Berlin Olympics, and you assassinate a fictional character who is Hitler's rearmament czar. And he was based on, this character was based on Donitz and Reiter. I don't speak German, but these people who actually were helping Hitler rearm. And Schumann wisely said, okay, I'll do that. And then, and I'm not going to belabor it, but the sudden conflict he finds himself in is that his target, this fictional character, and I made it fictional because, we know in Day of the Jackal, de Gaulle survives. Sorry if that's a spoiler, but that's, Frederick Forsyth's wonderful book, but that's just the historical fact. If I created a fictional character, this German rearmament czar, a fictional character, then the question would remain until the end: did Paul kill him or not? Well, suddenly Paul, who's a very, very bad guy, he's a killer. Suddenly, he does some intelligence and realizes this guy is a loving grandfather. He detests the Nazis. He wants to work within the Third Reich and bring back the Republic, and has legitimate arguments with the Treaty of Versailles, of course, which is one of the things that pushed Germany into World War II. And so suddenly the readers are thinking, well, what on earth is going to happen? We like Paul, we like this other fellow. And the story is, typical mine, goes back and forth until the very end, and surprise endings and so forth. What was it based on? I mentioned Day of the Jackal. That has always been an inspiration for me. And if your viewers haven't seen it, it's an incredible film. So I would recommend that. And I also wanted to write something historical, just for the fun of it. My father was a flyer in World War II, so I've had an interest in that. And I thought I'd give it a shot, and did well. I still, you never know about Hollywood. I've had 4 movies and a TV show made. That was the one I always thought would be a great movie, but you never know. Hollywood is Hollywood.
Okay, drumroll moment for the millions of fans of this beloved series around the world. It may surprise some viewers to know, but readers actually got their first glimpse of Lincoln Rhyme in The Devil's Teardrop, where they also meet FBI agent Parker Kincaid. Was Rhyme so irresistible a supporting cast character when you first conjured him up that you felt like he had the potential for his own series? And how did you first decide on the strategic decision to have him be physically disabled?
I'm a pedestrian writer. My prose is functional. It's hard for me to write. I have to rewrite a great deal to get it smooth. I repeat words within the same paragraph. It's sloppy, but that's partly because my mind jumps around a lot. I mean, if I've been born with anything, it's an imagination. And I have now on my computer, which I'm speaking to right at the moment, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 files of book ideas, all of which would be, and short story ideas, all of which would be valid. I'm not going to have the time at this age to write them or the energy to write them. And one has to pick and choose, of course. But I can't explain where they come from. There's nothing magical about it. There's no muse. I don't believe in muses. I believe in human imagination. And that's where Lincoln came from. Probably after I had seen an adventure thriller flick. And, we all know the big budget kinds of thrillers. And we come down to the end, and here's your hero. And it could be, I love Bruce Willis movies. Who doesn't, who doesn't love them? Who are some of the other great thriller actors? Tom Cruise, I go sit through those. I eat popcorn. I love them. I get as excited as anybody else. But, we come down to the end of the story, and there's invariably that scene, big climactic scene, which somehow has to occur on a cliff. I don't know. It's like I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. If there were a thriller set here, somehow there would be a huge cliff. I don't know how that happens. But anyway, the script writer says we've got to have a big cliff. So, and the villain, who may be someone like Jeremy Irons doing a villain turn for the fun of it. Why not? I think that's great. Is beating up. I'll pick on Bruce Willis here, and he's picking up Bruce Willis and throwing him into, the laboratory. There's glass because there has to be glass, and everything's shattering, and there's fire going on, and the police are at the door, but they can't get in. And so it's clear that Jeremy Irons is going to kill Bruce Willis according to the direction of the story, the flow of the story. And he's beat up, and he just can't survive, and he's knocked out. And at that point, Bruce Willis suddenly remembers, has a flashback, a recovered memory of the time his father taught him to kickbox. And he'd resented his father all these years, but now he can reconcile with his father and remember the kickboxing. So he jumps up and kickboxes, Jeremy Irons over the cliff. Or he remembers that the gun that we saw, not so subtly hidden, taped up under the table, he remembers that it's there, he pulls it out. And then with a wise quip, says, something like, so here's some lead for you, or something, something along those lines. I'm not at my most creative at the moment. I'm not an early morning person either, but, and I thought, it's a convention. It has to end that way. But what if you had a villain stalking somebody, and this somebody only had his mental faculties to defeat the villain, who used who used knives and guns or whatever he was using, and he had only his mental capacity to defeat the villain and stop him from being a serial killer or whoever it was. A la Sherlock Holmes, of course, who I always loved. I read him when I was young too, all the short stories and the few novels. Doyle didn't write too many novels, but I love the short stories. And I said, well, I thought back to Perry Mason, and Raymond Burr played Ironside, a character in a wheelchair, paraplegic, paralyzed from the waist down. And I thought, I want to go all the way. I want to have a character who is completely incapable of movement, who is pure mind.
For new fans among viewers who might not know, where did his one-of-a-kind name Lincoln Rhyme first arrive to you from?
I took my, obviously I like dogs. I breed and show them competitively. If you've ever seen the movie Best in Show, that's me. It's the takeoff on the dog showing world. I do the Westminster kind of thing. And so I took my my German Shepherd, Gunner, a big 120-pound German Shepherd, in for his checkup. And my vet's name was Rhyme, actually Rhymes, plural. And I thought, well, that's a good name. I grew up in Chicago, Lincoln, land of Lincoln. So it became Lincoln Rhyme. And I tend not to use S's on last names, because theoretically, if there's, unless it's, two sibilants like Jesus, you would say Jesus apostrophe for the possessive, but otherwise it's got to be S apostrophe. So, it's kind of awkward to say James's. So I decided to make it Rhyme. You can't say singular, but rhyme without the S, and that's where it came about. So I know you were expecting something, very, some formidable logic here, some deep mystical thing that goes back into my psyche, but nope, it was a veterinarian.
What about the book and ultimately TV and film series titled Bone Collector?
Yeah, it was one of those moments of inspiration. I knew that I wanted this fellow to become obsessed with bones because of the old elements of the book, harkening back to old New York. And Bone, I thought, was kind of creepy. I think at that point, we had not seen a lot of bones in titles. I have to say, after The Bone Collector came out, I got a fair number of emails saying, Jeff, are you going to let them do this? But of course, you can't copyright titles, and nobody came up with The Bone Collector. Although I should say The Bone Collector is a trademark of a hunting company accessory manufacturer. And I was a trademark and copyright lawyer. There's no problem with that. Somebody is not going to go to Cabela's Sporting Goods with the intent of buying a Bone Collector book and see a Bone Collector hat and get confused. So that wasn't the problem. But no, that moment of inspiration, it just occurred to me.
How about then seeing this world you created entirely inside your mind come to life on TV and the silver screen and be played by such remarkable character actors as Denzel Washington, for example?
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. I've been asked, did I want to be involved in films? And actually, I've written a script, and I'm working with somebody now, see if we can get that produced independently, But that's different from transferring a book onto the screen. And I don't, I don't play well with others generally. I wouldn't want to be involved in that process. But I have to say, and they can take, they took liberties. I mean, that's fine. If Philip Noyce, the director, were writing The Bone Collector, he'd do something differently than I do. If I were making the film, I'd do something differently than he did. But that's not what this process is all about. It's about somebody who has an expertise crafting a creative product. So I thought it was fantastic. And to hear, one thing I will say, I do write realistic dialogue, and most of the dialogue in The Bone Collector was taken from the book. And that was very exciting to see words that I had written show up out of the mouths of the characters.
Delving deeper into his character development, from his specialty as a forensic criminologist to his genius level IQ, and anything else you'd care to share about how he first fully came to life in the now legendary Bone Collector book.
I like playing with the idea that not only is he up against, that is the character who became Lincoln Rhyme, not only is he up against this villain and he has to use his mind, but he's up against himself, because he's considering whether or not he wants to continue living, to be or not to be, a choice everyone has, and based on circumstance. And the quadriplegia is a very difficult condition, of course. And I decided that I was going to give it a shot. I'm just going to try it and see what happened. And lo and behold, people fell in love with him. And his, he's a curmudgeon, but he's utterly ethical. He has no patience for any kind of illegality, for laziness, for duplicity. And he took off. And then it didn't hurt that Denzel Washington and Angelina Jolie starred in the film. And then he really took off. And my job is to give my readers books they want. End of story. I'm very troubled when I hear an author say, I write what I want and I don't care about the audience. Well, that's fine. I say I'm troubled, but there's going to be that reader who liked that book of yours 2 years ago and wants something in the same vein, and you give them this kind of gobbledygook that you're happy with. But we're making, my analogy in my courses is mint flavored toothpaste. People don't want liver flavored toothpaste. They want mint flavored toothpaste. And that's what I, as an author, am going to give them. People like Lincoln Rhyme. Lincoln Rhyme is here to stay.
Well, you definitely knew that after the success of the very early books in the series. And as he gets to work with his sidekick, Detective Amelia Sachs, she really becomes irreplaceable from the first book on through the rest of the series. What about her did you first fall in love with ahead of when readers did?
First of all, I like strong women characters because I personally like strong women characters. And, Tempest Brennan, Kathy Reich's wonderful books, Kay Scarpetta, and Sue Grafton's Kinsey Milhone, of course. I just like strong women crime detectives or heroes. And so I knew I wanted that, but I also wanted to turn the tables a little bit because, again, we see a lot of cliches. Now, this goes back to the 90s, remember the 1990s. And there was often the scene where the man would be, if there were a partnership or a female law enforcer comes in contact with a male law enforcer, the male law enforcer is, hardcore logic, and the female law enforcer is let's say, I can't say, let me put it this way. She would tend not to pull out her gun and shoot people. She would tend to, discuss it, like be the hostage negotiator. Whereas the man would, gun them down because he was hard, he was steel, and he didn't care about that. I just wanted to swap that because I thought it was interesting. And so Lincoln is, he's got his mind, his Sherlock Holmesian mind, but he's not a physical person at all. He can't be a physical person. And Amelia, she is the physical person. She shoots competitively. She drives a muscle car very fast. She works on her muscle cars, and yet what? She's intuitive. So because she's the one who will talk to the witnesses and sort of empathically step into the crime scene and learn things. But if there's a guy there she doesn't like, out comes her Glock, and the guy is in deep trouble. But certainly when I write Lincoln and Amelia, Yeah, I hear their voices, and it's very easy for me to do because they step into this, step into that role.
Throughout the aforementioned titles and others to come, we meet a fantastic and unforgettable cast of supporting characters. From Rhymes' former partner Ron Solito, Officer Roland Bell, his caretaker Tom Reston, of course Parker Kincaid, who we get reacquainted with after the Devil's Teardrop again in the 12th card, and of course Catherine Dance, who fans are first introduced to in The Cold Moon. How distinctively do each of them tend to introduce themselves to you as you're writing? And we would welcome any tips you'd be willing to share on the art of writing character dialogue.
All my characters have different voices. That's important for the readers to differentiate them. And you'll read a thriller. I say genre fiction. It applies to, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or sometimes literary fiction, where the author has crafted the dialogue. It's identical. I mean, there's no difference. Well, people need to speak. People in real life speak in different tones. They break up their sentences. Some are very articulate. Some stumble around and throw in the you knows and hulls, things like that. That makes for more credible work, more credible craft. But dialogue is really vital because we make things up, and we have to make sure that we get the readers to buy into our fantasy. This is like, again, getting on a roller coaster. We need them to agree to sit down, put the strap on, and then go where we take them. And we hope they're thrilled. But that requires, if you're going to have a flat roller coaster that just goes around like NASCAR, well, that's not going to work. So when we write our books, we have to have the ups and downs and the precipitous drops. And dialogue is an important way to do that. I love Tom. Tom Reston is his aide, and it's because someone in a with a severe disability needs a physical aid, and they have a kind of love-hate relationship. They're kind of called an old married couple, and Tom he's gay. He has a full-time partner, although they don't live together because Tom has to be on call 24 hours. I mean, he goes out sometimes, but he's a very courageous character, and he simply will not let Rhyme get away with any shit. That's just the way and you can beep that if you want, but he just won't do it. There are not a lot of people who put up with Rhyme, and he's served as an important person in his own right. In fact, in the new book, he does play an important role, but can't talk about that, of course. For aspiring writers out there, I would look at series fiction. Readers love to spend time with characters they like. Now, there are some standalones where you, the author, feel that the protagonist cannot survive the ending of the book. That's completely valid, as long as the death is satisfactory. By that, I mean it's set up in the story and it pays off. There's some payoff that artistically works for you. I obviously don't do that, but for the beginning writer, I would say it's an easier sell to a publisher to create a compelling, rich, usually a somewhat quirky character with some kind of specialty, and then just go from there. Keep your head down and go from there. And it is also very important to create the supporting characters. We just want to spend time with these people. Well, what makes us want to spend time with people in real life? Well, I, for one, like people who are funny. I don't write Carl Hiaasen books. I love Carl Hiaasen. He's hilarious. But I don't do that. P.G. Wodehouse, I don't write that book. I tried to write humor and it doesn't work. Although my books are laden with little snippets. Lincoln Rhyme is a wry observer of human nature. And I think in one of the books, somebody makes a comment that, oh yeah, that's ludicrous. And Lincoln says, what's ludicrous? Well, they're listening to music. And the fellow says, no, the musician Ludacris, one of the top sellers of all time. And he said, oh, what is he, a classical performer? Why would he have a name like that? And it's tongue in cheek. Lincoln actually doesn't know, but we kind of smile at that. So create characters that have a sense of humor, that are utterly ethical, and that may bring something to the table, a specialty, a quirky character like Ducky in NCIS, David McCallum, if you've seen that wonderful show. He's standing over a body that he's cut open for the autopsy, and he's talking about, I wonder what to have for dinner, and or making a wry observation about, no, we haven't seen that kind of bullet since the Boer War, and then he'll add, but that was before my time, and we just like somebody who knows that much about autopsies, about always the geek. Also NCIS, I think she's NCIS. I think she's the quirky geek girl. And so just ask yourself, who would I like to spend time with? The experts, people with a sense of humor, people who are brave, people with something going on that you may not know about, but we're going to be interested in tracking that down and learning it during the course of the book. And other characters, Fred Delray is an FBI agent who I just am writing a short story. And I should mention now, in the interest of completely spurious self-promotion, this year, what I'm doing with Putnam, my publisher here, I've got a new Coulter Shaw book coming out in May, and preceding that is a Coulter Shaw short story. And that's kind of to wet the whistle for the novel. And in the fall, the Lincoln Rhyme novel will be out in November. And in October, I think, or maybe late September, there'll be a Lincoln Rhyme short story that kind of wets the whistle for what's coming. The plots are different, but it just to get kind of gin up the interest a little bit. But I brought Fred Delray back, and now he's back in New York. And he's a man who ran, or still runs, confidential informants, CIs. And he is absolutely brilliant as a confidential informant himself. I mean, he's been undercover he's convinced Harlem drug lords that he's a drug lord himself. He has convinced Jamaican gangsters that he's representing another gang from East New York, and they better be careful. And he gets the patois down. He speaks the language fine. He's a fascinating character. And he wears gaudy clothes, and he dresses the way he wants, and he's an amateur philosopher. And there's a cute little scene in the book where he says, just got into a fight. It was terrible. And so Lincoln looks him over and says, are you okay? He said, yeah, but the other guy's got some scars. Well, the argument was about presentism versus existencism. These are two philosophical movements that have to do with the approach to time. And so Lincoln says, you had a fight about that? Oh yeah, it was a debate. Well, that's the kind of guy Delray is. On the other hand, he carries his Glock 17 in his back, his back waistband. And if he runs into one of these guys he's ever been up against, he doesn't hesitate to use it. But I always loved Fred Delray. I have to say, again, I'm a business person. Parker Kincaid from The Devil's Teardrop was in a book that could only have been a one-off, because it involved Parker Kincaid's an ace document examiner, now retired, worked for the FBI. And the book is about how do you stop a series of horrendous crimes when the only piece of evidence you have, literally the only piece, is a single letter, single document. And document examination thrillers don't get any better than that. So that was the end of it. Now Parker survives. He signs on occasionally in the other books to be an assistant, but I couldn't take him anywhere. Catherine Dance, I have to say, I was disappointed with. She's a kinesics investigator, California Bureau of Investigation, which no longer exists, by the way. It does in a different form, but that I write fiction, I make stuff up, so that didn't bother me so much. But the fact is, readers weren't wildly excited about her. The books didn't sell as well as I'd hoped. I certainly could bring her back, and who knows if there's, if there are any movie producers out there listening, those books happen to be available. So maybe there'll be a movie and she'll come back again. But she was really brilliant. She could see you, she'd see me go like this and say, oh, Jeff's lying. Or she wouldn't even have to do that. I'd hesitate 2 seconds and she'd say, oh, that's not his baseline behavior. He's making this up. So she might come back. But then again, I have a lot of other characters and ideas to occupy my time. Fans are enamored of The Coffin Dancer, which is about murder plot against a woman pilot who runs a charter service, and she was a fighter pilot, and has, let's say, crossed. I don't want to give anything away. Crossed people that she shouldn't cross, and she's a very strong character, of course. People love that book in particular, but generally, my fans responded just the fact that it's a Lincoln Rhyme book. They want Lincoln, they want Amelia, they want Lon, and Ron Pulaski too. And so it's more the characters that I think they like. My personal favorite probably is The Cold Moon, which introduces the villain, the Watchmaker, who's one of my favorites. And not I don't want to, if somebody out there hasn't read it, I think back to my comment earlier that I don't like blood and gore and violence. I think that's a poor substitute for suspense. Well, there is very, very little actual death in The Cold Moon. It's almost pure suspense. And I managed to pull that off in a way that keeps people turning pages. And it's a very interesting, the concept of time, I'm quite fascinated with. So, the books are not philosophical by any means. It's about good and evil.
We had the privilege of talking with Dr. Kathy Reichs this season, and really arguably before her Bones series, the general public didn't really have an idea of what a forensic anthropologist, or forensic anthropology even was. And the same could really be said for how the Lincoln Rhyme series brought forensic science and criminology into the pop reading realm for the first time, where it's now common knowledge. Does it make you proud to think that you've helped open readers' eyes to this amazing character and series, to this extremely vital tool in crime investigation? And if you'd share with us, who were some of your early sources?
I was there before CSI, and I knew I wanted to take what I find the intellectually stimulating puzzle of a Sherlock Holmesian type of problem solver. So Rhyme could not walk into a bar or roll into a bar and with any great facility and say, okay, buddy, I know, Jones was in here the other day and you got to tell me where he went because I know you know where that is. Well, that's not going to happen. So, but what could he do? How could he use his mind? Forensics, easy as that. So I made him the most brilliant forensic scientist in the country, if not the world. And then I did a lot of research. It was a lot harder back then. Now you can get anything you need online. And I have bookshelves behind me. They're too messy to show you, and they would also fall down if I moved the curtain. But I still have from back then, the 1990s, dozens of forensic science books for the police. And I subscribed to magazines for a while. And our job is to tell a story, not to write a treatise. And as long as I can stay credible and one step ahead of my general audience, I'm doing the right thing. I've talked to some people in national security. Had a friend who was a retired FBI agent. He gave me some information. I worked with the New York City police. I went to the bomb squad for a book I was writing.
For fans of the book and film of the same title, we'd love to use The Bone Collector to talk a little bit about your brilliant process for plotting an action.
I had the plot, and the plot was basically old New York clues that only Lincoln Rhyme could solve because he was passionate about knowing the city. And when you know the city where you're a crime scene detective, that can help you track down the bad guy and track down clues that lead to maybe potential future witnesses. And so I needed someone who could make certain appearances, and I'm going to be a little vague here so we don't give too much away, make certain appearances and seed those clues in so that at the end of the book, the reader goes, oh my God, I should have seen that coming. So that's a fine line, creating a real character, a living, breathing character, but not focusing on him or her too much. And so, but again, the plot came first, and then I fill in the characterization and the setting. Setting I don't care about very much. I mean, I want this page after page of look at Holcomb, Kansas in Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Of course, he wrote extensively about Holcomb, Kansas, and I love it, but that's a different type of story. I don't want to digress and go back and do who was the fellow who wrote The Source? James Michener, page after page, chapter after chapter of geography and sociology. We want to move a society, I should say. We want to move the story forward. So once I had the plot done, then I fill in the characters. I'm a very plot-driven author, and we can talk about outlines in a minute if we have time. But I come up with the story first. A very intricate story that's kind of like the TV show 24. Takes place over a very short period of time, lots of reversals, several subplots going at once. That's what I like to read, and that's what I'm comfortable writing. And I think readers like that too. And so when I have talked to professionals, what tends to happen is, and this is usually after I have a rather extensive outline of where the story is going to go, I find that they are such fascinating individuals that they don't inform where I want my tale to head. And so the TALE, I should say. And so I want to make sure that I can pick and choose the information that fills in my plotting. And it's generally inanimate sources that do that. Now the internet. Now I get basically everything I need on the internet. I had a question on a hack, and I had a friend who worked for National Intelligence, now retired, but still stays up on it. And I had to ask if this was possible, because I don't want to offend a reader. I don't want to get something wrong. You have to get it right. You have to get everything correct about weapons. That's number one. People get very upset if you get something wrong. You have to get all the computer stuff accurate too. Geography is important as well. So, but 99% of that I can get it online, and it's much more efficient. It allows me to craft my plots, plug in the information, and then just write the book.
Examining your gift for creating really spooky antagonists, you set the bar pretty high with Bone Collector, where we see the juxtaposed headspaces of thinking like Lincoln Rhyme and then Peter Taylor, aka Colin Stanton, a copycat of the famous in the book previous serial killer James Schneider. While others that come to mind include the super creepy coffin dancer from the book of the same title, Jim Bell and his scary nurse Lydia from The Empty Chair, the deadly ghost from The Stone Monkey, and of course Malarick from The Vanished Man. We'd love to use any of these to discuss your mastercraft in writing really, really complex antagonists, book in and out.
Well, I first of all, I want a larger than life villain, so that, and he or she should be, frankly, a little more resourceful than my hero or heroine, and then benefits from the absolute lack of compunction, any moral fiber. So that gives them an advantage. That way, when the hero proceeds, and I will tell all your viewers, my books have happy endings. I'm never going to kill Lincoln Rhyme. I'm never going to kill Coulter Shaw. They may meet some adorable friends along the way whose lives will be in jeopardy. I'm not above that, but so in creating the the villains, I want them larger than life. Now, remember, you're talking to the Procter and Gamble of crafting books here. I also analogize myself to a pilot. So say you've got a pilot and she's flying a big, 747. Well, we don't see those much anymore, but a 737 or something. And she's flying along and looks up ahead and sees a beautiful sunset. Wow, just one of the best sunsets ever. She doesn't care. She's looking at the instruments. And then half hour later, she looks up, terrible thunderstorm, winds, lightning. Oh, it's just awful. She doesn't care. She's looking at the instruments. Her job is to get the passengers safely to where they want to go. My job is to get the readers safely where they want to go. So I don't dwell in the darkness. I craft what I think are credible characters that don't scare me because I made them up, but I do hope scare readers because of this emotional connection between the bad guys and the good guys. Now, one thing I have to say that I do think is very important, and when I teach my courses, I can't really emphasize it enough. that I feel these novels should be about suspense, not gore. Alfred Hitchcock is my model. If you look at his films, there was very little blood. I think Martin Balsam got his forehead cut in Psycho. Janet Leigh, we never saw her actually stabbed in the shower scene. The Birds, Tippi Hedren got hit with a paper mache, seagull a couple times. It wasn't the end of the world. But he got such suspense. We sat on the edge of our seats. I think some of the books I've started to read and haven't finished are too gruesome. Some of the movies, I'll shut them off. There's nothing morally wrong with depicting gore, but I find it kind of a creative failure because it's telegraphing to me that the author or the filmmaker can't figure out a way to create what I think is enjoyable suspense, and it just fills in some gruesome details that are I think frankly gratuitous. And my response is, you can do better. Fans are enamored of The Coffin Dancer, which is about a murder plot against a woman pilot who runs a charter service, and she was a fighter pilot, and has let's say crossed, I don't want to give anything away, crossed people that she shouldn't cross. And she's a very strong character, of course. People love that book in particular.
Lincoln Rhyme and his longtime companion Amelia Sachs become more than professional partners by the time we get to The Broken Window and The Burning Wire. As you evolved their partnership on all fronts throughout the first decade of books in the series, what were some of the most enjoyable and perhaps challenging, given his physical status, aspects of making this relationship last this long in a believable way for readers?
Well, I do listen to readers' comments. I read reviews sometimes, but professional reviewers often are more interested in coming up with a clever turn of phrase than they are with enlightening the reader as to whether this might be a book for him or her. John Updike was, I think, the best critic who ever lived, and the man was astonishing. He could review architecture, photography, film, and of course, books and movies as well, primarily a book reviewer for the New Yorker. And he didn't review anything unless he had not only read the artists, let's say, call it the writers, body of work, but read other books in that genre or that field, so that he could comment intelligently on it. But a lot of critics just try to get the bon mots, and they try to get in a clever phrase. But readers, they don't, unless it's an ex-girlfriend, of course, they don't really have any agenda. So they want to express themselves honestly. And I listen to that. And many of my readers have expressed an interest in Lincoln and Amelia getting closer over the years. And I will say, this is not a surprise. This happened in I think 2 books ago, The Burial Hour. I think 2 books ago, they got married. They are Nick and Nora Charles now, from the Thin Man series by Dashiell Hammett. I believe that's Dashiell Hammett. I haven't read it for a while, but somebody could fact check me on that. I think that's it. And they, not that they don't still, a married couple, does that mean they don't fall into disputes occasionally? Oh no, that doesn't mean that at all. But readers have been very satisfied at that, especially with my assurance that I'm not gonna kill either of them. That's a cheap shot. There will be loss along the way, certainly, but the point is to give my readers an enjoyable experience. I was just writing something today. I think it was an interview, and the subject of my writing came up, and I said, well, the fact is, my books are really more about, as much as, or probably more about illusion than they are about crime writing. I'm an illusionist. I'm a David Copperfield, the modern day David Copperfield, the David Blaine, the Las Vegas illusionist, who sets up his stories with a goal there are moral messages in them. Good is bad. Police are hard workers and good people. Serial killers are bad. But they really are about, at the end of the day, I want my readers to say, God damn, I never saw that coming. What a thrill that is. And then I got to the end, but there were still 30 pages of the Deaver book left, and he twisted me again. And then the subplot had a big twist too. And that's basically my goal. Now, some people don't like that. When I'm reading a book at night, I'll pull one off my bedside table. I don't want my kind of high acceleration read, because I end every chapter, sometimes every section. Well, I have very short chapters now, but every chapter ends on a question. What is going to happen? And then you have to kind of calculate, how far can I go before I answer that question? Usually it's like one chapter beyond. You can't go too late until you answer that question. But at night, I don't want to read that. I'll pull out a Sherlock Holmes. I don't want a race car.
Turning to some of the more recent volumes in this extraordinary series, including The Kill Room, The Skin Collector, and The Steel Kiss, Burial Hour, and The Cutting Edge. What do you think it is about this particular series that's kept 50 million fans coming back for close to 25 years?
Generally, my fans responded just the fact it's a Lincoln rhyme book. They want Lincoln, they want Amelia, they want Lon, and Ron Pulaski too. And so it's more the characters that I think they like. But I like to have a hook of some sort. The Burial Hour was about about illegal immigration. The Broken Window was about data mining. The Burning Wire was about the electric grid. And so The Cold Moon, the theme there is time. The Vanished Man was about illusion and magic. So I like those themes, those hooks that readers can learn a little something about.
I spoke with another peer of yours, William Boyd, who got his own coveted call to write an original James Bond novel with Solo. When the opportunity came your way with Carte Blanche, what did you set out to do that were departures from the previous books? And what were you looking for in the same time to keep consistent for readers within the Bond traditions?
I waited 5 seconds before I said yes. And that's because I was driving down I-95 at about 80 miles an hour. I loved all the Bond books. Not a huge fan of the movies. I liked From Russia with Love. Dr. No was pretty good for the time. It was early, but I loved the books. I thought they were gritty. Bond was a very nihilistic character. He was an assassin. He was not he was certainly a man about town, but he was not a bon vivant. He was tortured when he was called on by the Secret Service, presumably MI6, though it was never named, the Foreign Intelligence Service, to assassinate somebody. And his job was to, shoot him in the back of the head. And he would go into a deep depression afterwards. That's not the Bond, the quippy kind of Bond we see from the movies, but the books was that way. And so I was just honored, and I said, well, and I've been on record as saying how much I like Bond and mentioned what I just did, I think. And the estate contacted me and said, would you write it? And I said, I'd be delighted to, but only in a couple circumstances. And I only say this because I think I could only do justice to the project in this way. And I said, I can't write the way Ian Fleming did. Those books are very character driven. There's no doubt that at the end, Bond's going to go up against Goldfinger or go up against Hugo Drax. It's just that it's a very linear story. There are very few twists and turns. Casino Royale had a kind of a mistaken identity, a big surprise there. Although if you've read mysteries, you could figure it out pretty quickly. And so, but people don't read it for that. They read it for the character. And that's not what I do. So I said, well, if you'll allow me to do two things, I want to write my kind of book with James Bond as a character. Twists, turns, surprises, subplots, and mistaken identities and big reversals at the end. Number one, and I want it in the present day because I want young readers to have the immediacy of knowing Bond the way I did when I was a young reader. And of all coincidences, Bond in the first series was a World War II, it worked for the Navy, Royal Navy, and he was stationed in Afghanistan. Well, now we have the Brits stationed in Afghanistan. So it moves seamlessly to the present day. And I know some Bond fans were not real kind of about that. Somebody, another competitive writer whose name I will not name, said, I don't see any purpose into bringing Bond into the present day. And kind of stuffy. He then said, I didn't read the book. So I thought, maybe if you're going to criticize something, you might want to flip through some of the pages. But I found that writing a somewhat stodgy book set in the 1960s, not that one couldn't do it, couldn't write a scintillating immediate book, it would just make readers wonder, like a young person who does not know, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, doesn't know what a payphone is. So Bond stops by the roadside and feeds coins into this box to make a call. The kid is going to naturally think, what on earth is this? Or, he needs to do research. So he goes to Q, and Q, of course, was not a person. Q was the branch. I stayed true to that. Q was basically the research and the science and technology department, like they have at the CIA, and has to look through a bunch of old magazines. Well, come on, let's move the story along. So anyway, and they were kind enough to say, yes, that's fine, go ahead. And I have to say the book was fun to write. It did very well. I could not have written another series character, though. I couldn't have done who's the Robert Ludlum,
The Bourne.
The Bourne. I could not have done The Bourne. I don't think I've ever read a Bourne. I could probably do a John D. MacDonald book, although those are, Travis McGee. I was a fan of his. But and then again, too, you talk to a lot of authors. We have egos, and we also have, a practical business sense. That's the only thing, carte blanche, the only thing I've written. I don't own the copyright to. I get paid when it's published, reprinted and so forth. That was part of the deal. But I do like my control. I want to maintain the copyright. And they were very nice. We talked about doing it again, but the fact is I have so many of my own ideas. And they'd be amenable to it. And I might, maybe at some point, if I take a year off, consider it again. But who knows? Maybe we'll see Bond in outer space at that point.
I imagine when you spend so much time living in your head with the complexities of a character like Lincoln Rhyme, book in and out, that it must be a welcome break to write standalones periodically, like The Bodies Left Behind, which takes readers on one of your classic cat and mouse chases through the woods of Wisconsin. And then we meet a mysterious bodyguard named Cortez in Edge, or the fantastic Octoberlist, where a poor mother races to save her kidnapped daughter.
I pick a standalone because it generally has a story that cannot be replicated. The Octoberlist was my novel that went backwards. It opens on Sunday night, and each succeeding chapter goes down 2 or 3 hours earlier, so that at the end of the book, we come to chapter 1. I wrote that because I wanted to write a surprise beginning book. And that actually, I'm quite proud of that. It's a short book, includes some of my original photographs to kind of help the reader along, because it's a little challenging. But in chapter 3, we see everything we've read up to that point. Is completely different from what we thought. Chapter 2 turns all of chapter 3 on its head. In chapter 1, maybe one of the biggest surprises I've ever written. That could not be done again. The Bodies Left Behind, a very claustrophobic but exciting book set in the wilderness of Wisconsin. A policewoman and a witness are being pursued by two despicable characters, and she is not the kind of character that I could bring back for a satisfactory series. Court in Edge, that was a first-person thriller, and it's very difficult to write the twists and turns that I like in first person. It's a real challenge, and so I decided I'm not going to do that. First person works well for character-driven books, but you have to be kind of careful because you need to withhold information from the reader, and that's unreliable narrator you can get away with to some extent, but you have to handle it very well. So if I have an idea for a book that I think has no voice as a series, I'll do that. But I will say I'm pretty happy now doing the Shaw and the Lincoln Rhyme book. So that's what readers can expect for the.
On another note, let's talk about a fascinating project that, if my math is right, actually involved 14 authors, called the Chopin manuscript. Please pull the curtain back for fans on how that project first landed in your sphere.
Well, that was a fundraiser for international thriller writers. They came to me and said, would I edit it? And to be honest, I think they put together the list of authors. I added one or two, and the way that works, it's called a serial novel. I wrote the first chapter. Well, my agreement was I would do it, but because I love, I'll back up even more. A serial novel is when somebody takes a concept, writes a chapter, hands it to another author, and they take it from there, hands it to a third author, they take it from there. So it's a very interesting, creative, visceral process. I, however, like my twists and turns and surprises. So I said, I'll do it, but I need to be able to write the first and the last and maybe the second to the last chapter as well, because I wanted to bring all this together. And they said fine, and we didn't get paid for it. It was all a fundraiser for the international thriller writers, and it was great fun. We did a sequel. It did very well. Sequel, The Copper Bracelet. Originally, it was an audio book, I should say, and I think it won the Audi Award, AUDIE, not AUDI, the car, of course. And I think maybe the second, Chopin manuscript first, the Copper Bracelet second, and they were published together called in a book called The Watch List, and it was great fun to do. But it's I just don't have the time to do it again. But it was a fun project.
Coulter Shaw is a more recent Jeffery Deaver creation the readers first meet in The Never Game and get to know even better in Goodbye Man and The Final Twist. This evolving series is also a great example of the art of establishing a genuine connection between character and reader, and how you did that so quickly with your fans.
I'll tell you when it started. It started with the John Pelham series back in the 80s, I think the 80s. And John Pelham was a location scout for a film company, and he traveled around the country looking for places to shoot films in. He was a disgraced former director. He'd had some trouble with the law, and this is what he was doing now. You know, that old trope, of course, the scarred hero goes on a quest. And he'd come to town, and then invariably there would be a crime, and he would be an amateur private eye and solve the crime. And he had I think his grandfather's old Colt Peacemaker. He was kind of again, the Alan Ladd, Shane gunslinger character, set in the modern day. And I loved the series. It didn't do well. I think I got an Edgar nomination for that one as well, but it didn't sell well. And I think one of the reasons it didn't sell well was that it had the contrived conceit that by coincidence, he happened to be at a place where a crime occurred. And also it had the Hollywood motif. Now, if you're Elmore Leonard, you can get away with Get Shorty and do a wink, wink, nod, nod at Hollywood. But really, that's what it is. It's kind of a joke. And Hollywood is sort of a pastiche of itself. And I love Day of the Locust. I love Hollywood stories, but they don't really fit well with the crime that I want to write. So I took the concept of the guy who travels around the country in a Winnebago, and over the years I thought, well, what can I do with that? Because I just like the idea. He's utterly itinerant. And so I guess I was reading, I guess I was listening to a story about the reward business, how people, it's not a profession, I kind of made that up, but people can make millions of dollars. The State Department is offering a $25 million reward for the whereabouts of a particular terrorist. And there are hundreds of thousands of dollars of rewards offered for, missing spouses, children, escaped convicts, and criminals who have not been brought to justice. And I thought, what if somebody made his living doing that? And then it turns out, and this is Coulter Shaw. He travels around the country. He's the son of a survivalist, and who was the father taught him skills to survive. He's not a wacko survivalist, because as it turns out in the new book coming out in May, The Final Twist, we learn that he had good reason to be paranoid, and that the whole family is in danger. The whole Shaw family is in danger because of some of Ashton Shaw's, their father's, discoveries. But I just decided I like this character. He travels around the country. He's single, is involved with women from time to time. may fall in love, may get his heart broken. Who knows? That remains to be seen. But Final Twist is the third book, and they've been doing well, and people like him a lot. And I enjoy writing them. And again, these are books that are very character driven, but still plot twisty, turny sorts of stories. And I'm just gonna again keep my head down and do once. Last 3 years, I've done one a year. Then he'll be out again in 2000. What year is it now? 20. He'll be out again in 2022, and just keep him out there. People, want to spend time with him. But I have to say this, and I think it's important. About 3 years ago, I was listening to NPR, and I heard a fascinating story by a neuroscientist, radio story, nonfiction. And the neuroscientist said that research has shown that the part of our brain that creates an emotional bond with real human beings, that is our family and our friends on the good side, and our maybe our bosses or the people who piss us off, and the antagonistic siblings on the other side, for good or bad. It's identical to the part of the brain that creates emotional bond with fictional characters. I found that fascinating. And so as of about 3 years ago, with all the projects I just mentioned, I have consciously decided to invest more backstory in the characters, not sacrificing the plot. In fact, I'll go into my new approach to writing in just a minute. I know I'm jumping around here. My books don't digress as much as I do, but so now the books are shorter than they used to be. Bone Collector was like 520 pages. That's a lot of thriller to get through. A lot of technical stuff. I'm writing leaner now. I think people in this streaming age want leaner books. I'm writing more dialogue-oriented books. And the paragraphs are shorter, the chapters are shorter. I want people to have the same experience they have while they're looking at Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu, and the original series there I'm speaking of. So I just decided, well, the books are going to be shorter. There's still going to be that much plot, but now we need to hit character really hard. I want readers to fall in love with the characters and get that emotional kick from the connection between them and the main character. And already I've got 2 books in the Coulter Shaw series out, and he's a guy who travels around the country and looks for rewards. Sort of like, it's a modern day story, but sort of like Alan Ladd Jr. in Shane. The gunslinger traveled around the country. I've already had a lot of emails from people, primarily women, who say, "I like him." Is he based on anybody real? And could you give me his phone number? But see, they've created, well, I hope I've created a connection between this guy and my readers. And then the new Lincoln Rhyme book, again, a bit shorter. We haven't released the title yet. That'll be out in November. I'm doing 2 novels this year. The Final Twist, Coulter Shaw novel, out in May. The Lincoln Rhyme out in November. That too, I focus in on a character. And for the first time, I switch back and forth between first person and third person. And in first person, we're in the mind of this fellow who is a horrific human being, just horrific. And yet, I based on my reading and rereading the story, people are going to be very compelled to learn about him.
In that same spirit, it sounds like your excitement for writing roots these days and how busy your creative mind keeps you.
It was a very good question, Jake. I take a great deal of pleasure out of crafting stories that I think will give other people pleasure. I am very, well, when I teach my courses in writing, a student will say, I wrote this passage and I just loved it. And I say, why did you love it? And he said, it just made me feel good. I looked at it, I read it, and I could put those words together. And my response is, not to denigrate something, this wonderful process, but I say, well, is it going to make your readers happy? Is that going to help forward their experience of the book? So, and it may or may not, but if it doesn't, then you need to rethink it. And if I write a passage, I'll get a chill, and it may be because it resonates with something in my personal life or my past. And then I have to ask myself, well, does it belong in the book? 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. It's just that I happen to, I close my eyes, I touch type, I let my mind wander where it will, and these words just come to me. Who knows where? So I tend to be a little more detached about it. But that in itself, just crafting that story that I think people will like and coming up with a plot twist that's going to be credible is just a good thing. I also, why do people write? I have a very, very intense hatred of boredom. I get bored very, very easily. And with writing, I'm very antsy, and I just can't stand to sit still. I pace and write. Well, not write at the same time, but I pace. I have a Fitbit. The other day I was working on this short story that was causing me some difficulty. So I paced within the house probably 5,000-6,000 steps and I had a pad on my kitchen island, and wrote down the ideas. Finally, I got it worked out, but I have to do that. And so writing, if you write, you'll never be bored. It's always the challenge of telling the story, but always the story that has to benefit the reader. That's what it's all about for me. I just finished 2 novels this year and 5 short stories, all within the space of 1 year. So I've got all these other characters running around in my head. And I think I've written 43 or 44 novels. The books and stories are pretty well said. Again, I do the short stories for Amazon Original Shorts. I actually have kind of stepped out of the box a little bit. In April, I'm doing 3 original occult audio books for audio short stories for audible.com. And I had great fun writing those. And we're going to see how they do. Because I wrote them quite quickly. They usually have a lot of occult ideas. I might like to go in that direction, never neglecting Lincoln Rhyme and Coulter Shaw, of course. And I guess I'm going to see how this film thing plays out. It was an original story idea, script based on an original story of mine. Somebody else is writing it, and which is good, again, because not playing well with others, that kind of thing. But maybe I could get involved as a producer or something like that. And I mean, independent, truly independent. Some of these, Juno, one of these little independent things that may take off. But I live basically in a dark room with a computer and 2 dogs, and I don't get a chance to talk much, except I hear the voices in my head. In my case, that's all right because they're the characters most of the time. But I'm happy just to chat about what's going on. So Midnight Lock, a Lincoln Rhyme book, the 16th, I think, in the series, came out last November. And that's about a nefarious character whose nickname is the Locksmith. And he can break through any lock that ever existed. And, we think he doesn't, he breaks in and he's a sexual assaulter, he's a robber. No, he just breaks in, sits down on the chair next to the bed and watches somebody for a little while, and then maybe has a ham sandwich and then leaves, and they wake up. And that's the terror in the book, that their space has been violated. And of course, it's a metaphor for today, what all the space that's all our spaces are being violated. And I couldn't help but have a character that's based on QAnon, this blogger who takes, completely false tales and churns them so that they are bought by people. And it's the telephone game, it's repeated from this blog to that person to that other person. And it's a terrifying prospect. I sort of call this book Psycho meets Succession. And it's been getting very good response. And but Jake, maybe you've asked an author, so what's your favorite book? And I could ask you this because you, of course, are a prolific author too. And the answer is always the one you're working on right now or the one after that. So if I may talk a little bit about that book, that's called Hunting Time. And this features my character, Coulter Shaw, who we've seen 3 times before in The Never Game, The Goodbye Man, and The Final Twist. And this is the 4th in the series. And Coulter's has become quite popular
And I hope that popularity will be increased. I suspect it will next year when the TV series on CBS, Columbia Broadcasting System airs. That's starring Justin Hartley from This Is Us, directed by Ken Olin from 30 Something, and also This Is Us. He's done a number of things as well. And so this book I just finished, and it's just extremely exciting. And that'll be out in November, I think. And in this book, Coulter Shaw has to travel to a small town in the Midwest and track down a woman and her daughter who are being pursued by her apparently crazed ex-husband. I left it in competent hands. I am now working on 2 other projects simultaneously. Well, 3 other projects, actually. What I'm most excited about is, I'm sure you've seen Quentin Tarantino films, whether you're a fan or not. And some I like, some I don't care for too much. But one thing I do respect is his ability to jump time frames and perspectives. So I have just finished a series of 4 interlocking stories for Amazon Original Stories. That's called The Broken Doll. And these stories are independent. Each has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But there are characters from one story that appear in another story that may be the third story, but the third story happens before the first story. And it sounds a little complicated, but I really believe in giving my readers an easy and fun experience. So what I've done is a little chart at the beginning of each of the stories that shows where in the universe it's not supernatural, where in time these stories are set. And it's got just some wonderful twists and turns and surprises in it. And that I just finished editing. I'll be doing copy editing soon. And that will be out this year. So The Broken Doll. And then I'm writing a new Lincoln Rhyme book too. That'll be out in November of next year. There are authors who have a relationship with their characters. And I've heard that they are best friends. Sometimes they're like all best friends. There's sometimes moments of antagonism, sometimes moments of great love. I'm a pretty much a cold fish when it comes to that. I am as distant from my books and my characters as I can be. Why? Because that allows me to tell a story that I believe will objectively thrill and energize and captivate my readers. If I'm too close to a character, or I have an emotional engagement with them, that could lead to errors. That could lead to mistakes. I have to lead them down the path the way I have decided the path is going to go. And occasionally, the way I write, we talked about it a bit, but I outline extensively, 8 months of outlining. I get the entire book planned out ahead of time. And only then do I sit down and write it. And, there's creativity in both stages. People say, where's the creativity there? Well, outline is creative. You have to make up where the story's going to go. And then drafting the prose is creative too, because you have to think of how to say it. But occasionally, I'll be writing a character who was usually a secondary, maybe even a tertiary character. And, I just sit back, my eyes closed, I type, and, a few ideas occur to me that weren't in the outline. And suddenly that character has the potential to become something else. And you know what happens? That is the next victim, because ain't no character going to take over my story. He or she wants to write a novel, go write your own damn novel, but this is mine. But I will say I've pulled characters out of books and put them in other ones because they were very, they have a very appealing attitude. As far as Lincoln goes, though, there's a lot of me in him. The new book, well, let me put it this way. Those readers of Lincoln Rhyme are aware of a villain, his nemesis, his Professor Moriarty, nicknamed the Watchman, and a watchmaker. I'm sorry, Watchman is something else. The watchmaker, because he's a brilliant Moriarty-like villain, and he creates his plots for whether he's like a for-hire killer, for-hire terrorist. He has no allegiance to anybody except those who pay him. Sort of like the unnamed character in Day of the Jackal, you may recall. And but he puts together his plots the same way he pursues his hobby, which is making clocks and watches. He actually puts them together himself, and he plots out all of this, these very nefarious plans. And he's been Lincoln's nemesis for a long time, and it's finally time for them to meet head to head and go head to head. This is the showdown, and the book, has the line in it where Amelia says to Lincoln, Amelia is now his wife, says, Lincoln, she says Rhyme, she doesn't call him Lincoln, Rhyme, nothing lasts forever. And they kind of share that moment when they look at each other's eyes, and you think, I better finish this book to find out what they mean. And in fact, if any of your viewers are interested in a little, I would call it the launching pad for this novel, which has yet to be finished, of course. There's a short story that will be coming out, not exactly sure when, I guess sometime next year. My publisher here, Putnam, my publisher in the UK, HarperCollins, published it as sort of a teaser for the forthcoming book, and it's called A Perfect Plan. And it is. I'm really hesitating because there's a lot of stuff in it. It's a standalone. It's a very good standalone short story, but within it are seeds that will grow into some plots in the novel next year, which is as yet unnamed. We have a name, but I'm not going to release it just now.
Before we go, after so many years of one-of-a-kind writing, you've been and remain an influence and remain an inspiration for millions of aspiring authors of any age around the world. For those with the aim of following in your footsteps, what are a few tips that you'd give here that worked for you when you were first picking up the pen?
I'm going to be on my teacher's high horse here for just 2 more minutes. You got to rewrite a lot of times. A lot of people don't. I mentioned Lee Child. I don't think he rewrites much. I don't think I know he doesn't work from an outline. I don't think Michael Connelly does. George R.R. Martin, they don't work from outlines. I'm just comfortable outlining, again, because my mind's scattered. I jump around. If I were to write the book, just start out, I would get confused and so forth. So outlining works for me. And Joyce Carol Oates said, she doesn't talk about doing long outlines, but she says, you can't really write your first sentence until you know what your last sentence is. I'm paraphrasing her there. So I recommend that. But so once the outline, I outlined for a long time. Once the outline's done, I bang out the first draft quickly, and then I rewrite. Now, about the rewriting, you rewrite on the screen, for me, the first 20 times or so, because you may move things around. You may change the name of a character. You think chapter 3, well, in the outline it was there, but on reflection, it might be better in chapter 5 position. It's very easy to do. And or have I mentioned he had a Glock 17 earlier in a Black Hawk holster? Well, I don't need to say that the second time. I just search it and say, I say his Glock, not his Glock, which was in the holster, which I mentioned, 40 pages ahead. So that online helps, but you've got to print it out. You got to print it out and read it on paper, because you're going to see things that you missed entirely. I will read the same paragraph a dozen times on the computer screen. When I print it out, I see typos and then conceptual problems that I missed. Okay, that's part 1, edit on the computer. Part 2, edit on paper. Part 3, edit while you're listening to it. I have a program called Natural Reader from Natural Soft. It's not product placement. I don't think I paid for it, or if I did, it was like $10 a month. They don't send me anything. I think Microsoft Word has a function that will read your manuscript back to you. I like the facility of Natural Reader. And I, once the manuscript is done, it's been through the online edits, the paper edits, I print it out one last time and I listen to it and follow word by word. And you would be astonished at how many things you have missed, because your eyes just jump ahead. When you read it, you can't do that. And you're also going to find that the dialogue is stilted. Characters will say, we are going to bury the body, are we not? Well, people don't talk that way. We're going to bury the body, aren't we? And, that makes, when you make those changes, it brings the reader that much more, even though it seems like a small thing, that much more into your story. So it's, I'm just a huge advocate of that. And I suggested to one friend that he do it, And he said, what, listen to the book I've just written? No way in hell, that's not going to happen. So draw your own conclusions. I found it very helpful. I would say there's no stigma to self-publishing, but if you do want to be successful, study the successful traditionally published books and write those. By that I mean mixing genres, which happens a lot in fan fiction and in self-published books, can make it difficult to be published. Know in your heart that there's always a market out there among the traditional publishers for a well-crafted fill in your genre or literary novel, if that's what you're writing, if you do a good job of it. And doing a good job, I guess my advice would be to know what you're going to write ahead of time. Doesn't mean outline, but just have an idea where it's going. Don't rely on the muse to start in chapter 1 and sustain you through chapter 85, because that's not going to happen in most cases. You should find an agent. Don't deal with the publisher directly. Find an agent. You should get used to the idea that you're going to be rejected over and over again. But remember, rejection is a speed bump. It's not a brick wall. The only person that will stop you from proceeding is you. There'll always be another publisher. And then finally, I guess I'd say, take it very seriously. We are in the business of crafting a very honorable and noble product. Take pride in writing, and write each book or story as if it were your last, and it's what you will be remembered for.
Mr. Deaver, it has been an absolute privilege having your company here today. We thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Well, you take care. I'll talk to you soon.